now it's time to talk about the things that I would suggest not doing during your child's diploma. And again, just want to point out that this is from my own personal experience and might be different to yours. The first thing I would avoid doing is actually helping them with study, because the syllabus for each topic is very specific. Even for my dad that did civil engineering, I asked him not to help out for me with physics, and this is for a few reasons. Firstly, it's because sometimes the syllabus completely skims over some concepts. For example, in physics, the probability wave function, we don't need to understand what it is or even really realize its purpose. Instead, we only need to know the definition. Whilst this sounds weird, this is how the syllabus works, and sometimes you only need to know what it means instead of understand what it means. Secondly, it's because teachers are much more equipped to answer questions because after all, they are teaching the syllabus, so they do know the syllabus inside out. So if your child ever has questions, and I really recommend them having questions and asking teachers and getting feedback as I mentioned in their section of the course, they should be asking the teachers, they shouldn't be asking you. Lastly, it might create a bit of a strange relationship as you'd be seen as being superior in the subject, and overall it's just not the best idea. So I'd recommend avoiding helping out with study. Next, you're not going to like what I'm going to say, but I would recommend avoiding asking them about the schoolwork in general. Whether it's asking how they're going with their IA, what the next assessment is, when the next deadline is, I found that it creates an extra layer of pressure for my parents that really I didn't need. Deadlines, IAs, and the workload already make up the vast majority of our thoughts and what we talk about in school already. Although every single student knows the amount of workload they have, being reminded of it from their parents overall isn't the best experience. On the other hand, something I commend my parents for doing is being interested in what I'm doing, not how I'm doing it. Essentially, you want to give them validation over the work they've done and what they've achieved, rather than doubt over how they've done it and why they've been doing it this way. Following on from what I just said, try avoiding asking when deadlines are. Instead, create a shared calendar where you can see exactly when every single deadline is, as well as upcoming assessments and exams. I found this much more effective than constantly asking 24/7 when the next deadline is, because trust me, there are a lot of deadlines. Similarly, the next thing I would suggest avoid doing is asking them about their IA whilst they're still doing it. After they've submitted it, it's really nice to go over it because you can see what they've achieved and what they've done and what they've been working on. And when you're asking if they can share with you their IA and walk you through it, make sure you do so from a place of curiosity rather than one of criticism and asking them whether this would be enough to get them a 7 or whether they think they did it the right way. From my experience, the time leading up to the IA deadlines are very hectic, especially because I had a lot of them due in quite a short period of time. If they're quite busy or stressed, asking them to walk you through the IA, which is currently bringing them a lot of stress, might not be the best idea. Try to wait a day or two after they submitted it before you ask them if they can walk you through it. And now to move on to something that a lot of parents are very conscious of, but I just want to point it out, and that is interrupting your child whilst they're in the zone and focused. Try and engage when they're in the zone and focusing hard. For example, for the 2 weeks leading up to my TOK essay submission, I was basically thinking 24/7 about how I could answer the question, from what perspective I could look at the question, and then I'd write a paragraph, and then I realized I had taken it from the wrong perspective and I had to rewrite it. There was a whole 2 weeks of me constantly thinking about how can I improve what I've written. And although my parents might have just walked in and seen me sitting there blankly looking at the screen, I was actually thinking really hard because sometimes all you have to do is just sit down and think. It can be that simple. And even if it's a menial task like taking the bins out or feeding the dog, just make sure you ask them, hey, is this a good time? Do you have 30 seconds? Because even if you really want them to do a particular activity or whether you have exciting news to share with them, make sure they're in the right frame of mind. Because if they're focusing hard, you might break their train of thought and completely lose a whole paragraph they had in their head. Basically, try not to walk into their room and start blasting out news and information, which might be interesting, but not always the best idea because they might be deep in thought. If for some reason you're going to ignore all but one of my suggestions, let this be the one that you follow. Repeat after me. It's their diploma. Don't force onto them your expectations. Yes, you're paying for their education. Yes, they're growing up. Yes, you want them to do well after school. Yes, you want them to get the highest mark they can. But you also want them to enjoy and make the most of the final years at school. I said this to the students and I'm going to say it again here because it is incredibly important. There is no point getting a 45 if you're going to be miserable throughout the process. Their mental health should be yours and their top priority. It's up to them how much effort they put into the IB. Because you can try and influence them as much as you want, but when they're feeling stressed and overwhelmed with the amount of workload they have, the only thing that is going to get them back up is their own desire and motivation, not yours. Personally, I went through quite a roller coaster with my desire and willingness to get a 45. At first, it started off with me wanting to do my best. And after a year of working super hard towards my goal of getting a 45, I was lucky enough to get a place into ANU. This is when I thought, Wait a second, my exams are 3 months away. I could theoretically just never touch my books again, never lift a pen until my final exams, and still pass and get into the uni degree I wanted. This was a real challenge for me because it forced me to think about, why bother? I'm already into the degree. Why even spend more time studying? What am I doing this for? After having an open conversation with my parents about how I was feeling, I realized why my original motivation of getting a 45 came from. It was to prove to others that you don't have to drop your co-curriculars, your sport, or your social life to do well. To prove to others that you don't have to pick either sport or academics. To prove to others that it could be done. And those ideas stuck in my head, and they were the only reasons why I kept going towards my original goal of doing the best I can. What I want you to take from this is to let them realize what they want out of their IB diploma. Is it to get a 45? Is it to pass? Is it to get a 7 in a particular subject? Is it to beat their friend? Is it to beat their brother? And all of these are fine reasons. Please just make sure their reasons for working hard aren't because I feel like I have to or because I'll get in trouble otherwise. They're about to enter the real world and become more and more independent. You don't want your expectations of them to become their limiting beliefs now, during the IB, and for years to come. Now, I wasn't exactly sure where else to put this information, so I'm going to put these words of wisdom I have right here. First of all is that they will be stressed, they will be overwhelmed, it will be a challenge. Overall, it is a marathon and it does last 2 years. It's not a sprint. You should act as a rock, making them feel loved, valued, and cared for during these 2 years of uncertainty and pressure. And finally, I said the exact same thing to the students, but I'm going to reiterate it now. Every single student is going to have a completely different IB diploma experience. So don't compare what your child is doing to another student because they might have completely different goals. This is true for all aspects of life, but particularly schooling. So make sure you don't compare yourself and don't compare your children to others.